industrial process.
80% of those plantations are FSC certified as responsibly managed forests.
They're not forests. Plantations are not forests anyway.
It involves the use of chemicals, of heavy equipment.
To fulfill the overconsumption really in the north. It's not to benefit local people.
South Africa exports probably, 40%, 50% even of its total timber resource is exported in the form of wood chips for pulping in Japan.
A lot of decisions have been made unilaterally.
Our models for forestry have been very fixed.
We've trodden too hard.
We were into plantation forestry, into growing trees very fast, into making fiber, and just putting trees in wherever we possibly could.
About sustainable development. Our people should be engaged from the very onset.
People who are working in the plantation, there are around 50 people, and people who are not getting water are more than them.
So people should be identifying what development should take place in their own land.
Does the country need more timber?
Plantation forest management has been done in this country to close to 100 years or more.
The trees that are being used are alien to the region. The eucalypts from Australia, pine trees originally from Mexico. They use a tremendous amount of water as they evergreen.
There are approximately 1.4 million hectares of formal plantation forestry in the country.
But there's a further 1.6 million hectares of unmanaged timber plantations. That's where these trees have spread into the most difficult to harvest areas, into the steep ravines. So in totality, it's more than 3 million hectares of South Africa. And that's some of the most biodiverse, the highest rainfall areas in South Africa, the best soils planted to timber.
The industry has created this false illusion that they are plantations, that is, are forests. And they continue to perpetuate this illusion by using this thing called the Forest Stewardship Council, which certifies plantations and calls them sustainably or responsibly managed forests.
We follow sustainable practices that are acknowledged by other people around the world. And if we look at the history of forestry management for South Africa for the past 100 years, we can point out economic, social, and environmental benefits.
Certification has forced the forestry sector to become far more environmentally conscious, far more environmentally responsible, to clear tens of thousands of hectares of land. The upper reaches of Lake St. Lucia have been cleared, riparian zones across Mpumalanga, across KwaZulu-Natal have been cleared and are now being managed in ways that would not have happened had it not been for certification.
FSC they've got their principles and criteria which were designed for forests, and they've been applied to industrial timber plantations here in South Africa, and 80% of South Africa's industrial timber plantations are FSC certified.
What we import, it's about 13 billion per year for forestry as an industry. What we export, the latest figures, that would be 2008 figures, we exported about 16 or 17 billion, and our net was about 3 billion. That is what we added to the margins of the country.
You're not supposed to be able to certify trees which are invasive. Both pine trees and eucalyptus trees and wattle trees, they are extremely invasive.
Economically, you have to, as a country, earn foreign revenue because it makes a difference to your balance book. What we should be saying as forestry is that where possible, we should have as much beneficiation as possible.
Plantations are not supposed to be certified if they have a negative impact on stream flow.
The 14 odd billion that we export, 40% of that is paper. Pulp, it's about 30%, 2% is other, and 24% is solid wood.
Near Nelspruit, Ngondwana is the largest mill in southern Africa and privately owned. The paper and pulp industry is the main driver of plantation expansion and utilizes 2/3 of wood produced. In the same area, the Sidwala Caves are being impacted.
The caves have become incredibly dry and progressively drier over the past couple of years since the newly established timber plantation in the cave catchment is now maturing.
We believe that the FSC is encouraging overall higher consumption of these products globally. That, in turn, creates the demand for more tree plantations on more community land for more water.
All these certified forests are supposed to enhance soil biological matter and long-term soil sustainability. The soils here are being impoverished and degraded. How can they be FSC certified? That's the question, and it's a very difficult answer. Follow the money.
Currently, 70% of the plantations in South Africa are owned by private people or private companies. Only 30% of the plantations are owned by the state.
And here in South Africa and here in this region, it's not forests which are threatened, it's grasslands. We need to get more emphasis on the protection of this very, very scarce and valuable grassland.
For more than a decade, Geosphere has been creating awareness about the impact of timber plantations.
In Mpumalanga, most of the mist belt or the escarpment area has been planted to timber. That's our highest rainfall areas, and that's our catchment areas for the rivers which flows to the Lowveld and to the sea.
Historically, we'll see a lot of areas that have gone under trees that probably shouldn't have gone under trees, or too much of an area or too much land that has gone under trees without consideration of the people downstream.
So basically all people that's living underneath these timber plantations, underneath these catchments, are impacted upon because of their rivers physically running dry.
The National Water Act was Act 36 of 1998. Just put a lot of constraint on that grabbing of resources and a recognition that resources actually belong to everybody, the rivers included. Most forestry is not as yet licensed. Forestry, like all other water users, qualifies as an existing lawful use if it was in place, legally, lawfully in place, over the period 1996 to 1998. Until they can get around to doing that licensing, forestry can continue in much the same way.
How much water do these exotic, fast-growing trees and plantations utilize? One tree draws a minimum of 25 litres per day, the equivalent to the basic free daily allocation for each South African. Now, 1 hectare of plantation land has a minimum of 1,000 trees. So, if we exclude the unmanaged hectares, then 1.5 million hectares of managed timber plantations means a minimum of 1.5 billion trees, which are drawing 37.5 billion litres of water per day. If we compare that to a rounded-off population figure using the 25-litre basic allocation per day, that amounts to 1.25 billion litres per day for people, which means that timber plantations use 30 times more water than the population's daily basic free allocation.
The amount of water that is used by the industry, it's a concern, but people need to look at the bigger picture. It's a percentage of what? It's less than 4%.
Many communities do not have reliable access to clean water. Meanwhile, water charges on timber plantations are so low that researchers have calculated that were plantations to be charged adequately, the profit margin could be reduced by up to 30%.
Historically, the land timber industry has been linked to forced removal of African people from their areas, and post-94 we have seen a continuation of that land denial by timber plantations being pushed more into these rural communities.
The green plague, the green desert that covers this whole area, the largest plantations in the world, have displaced thousands and thousands of people. The these big Mondi and Sappi kind of things, they went in, they made sure that nobody could move back by bulldozing all the old farmhouses and stuff that were there. Plus, they took all the best land. Anything, if you're driving along and you want to know how much rainfall there is, if there's a plantation there, you know there's more than 2,000 millimeters a year.
Bushbuck Ridge in Mpumalanga is an area where displaced people have resettled.
Most of these people that are here in Bushbuck Ridge, they have been actually removed from where they stayed in their ancestral land just because to make way for the plantations.
Though resettled, these people still suffer the effects of the plantations.
Oh, yeah, when they came here, there was still some water that were flowing down the downstream, just nearby here, and of which now there's nothing.
Our rivers just come up there, the mountains where the plantations are. One way or the other, the plantations do affect us.
Most of the time when the water comes out, it's dirty.
Wow. Literally, when there is no water from the taps, there is no alternate water. There is no way they could get water.
We see people that has to literally walk for kilometers and stand for hours with drums in order to collect water.
We know South Africa can only meet 6% of its water requirements. That's why South Africa imports water from Lesotho, for example. So to develop an industrial process or business or timber or agro process, that takes actually much more of the water, especially for a product consumed outside South Africa. Is actually a daylight robbery to the majority.
First, people were evicted from their land, where they used to have livestock, where they used to be able to grow food. As a result, people currently, there's serious, massive food shortages in Swaziland.
They could go into the mountains and hunt for wild animals. They could collect wild fruits. They could collect medicinal plants. They could collect thatching grass. They could collect fern, burning or firewood. And now, of course, there's none of that utility remains.
80% of our black people consult in traditional healers. Like if you can see now, there are no trees because traditional healers find their medicine out in the wild trees.
This a muti from the banks of the river that specifically it's found on the banks of the river, and of which now they don't have because there is no more banks, it's only dry down there now. And even right here on the mountains, there were some plants that you get because it was moist by then, being fed from the rivers because the river is not so far from here. So now there is literally nothing. It's very bad for our grandchildren because literally there is nothing that they're going to know, to learn about custom and traditions in relation to nature. That version is totally lost now.
The current estimation is that 60% or more of plantation or forest under plantation is under claim. What happens is we work with the Land Claims Commissioner. They've already done a lot of work. What is outstanding now is for them to do what they call an individual confirmation of beneficiaries. Once that has been done, they give us the details, and the minister responsible for forestry will then release the revenue to the community until such time that the lease agreement comes to an end.
There's been some communities who's been successful land claimants, and they got back land that was taken from them years ago, but now the land has changed. Doesn't consist anymore of open grasslands and pockets of indigenous forests where they could collect medicinal plants and fruits and edibles, and they can't graze their cattle there anymore. It's all changed over to industrial timber plantations. So these people are now forced into this paradigm of producing pulp for multinational corporations. Almost everywhere there's pine trees and eucalypts coming up in the indigenous forests. Those trees have to be removed, because if they're not removed, we're going to sit with just one big, massive monoculture of alien trees in this region.
In the next 3 to 5 years, we will as government spend 3 billion rands on programs that will ensure that we deal with the clearing and rehabilitation of land. Go back in a few years' time, you will find that the land has gone back to what it was before plantation forestry. I'm a bit concerned because it sounds like people are saying, what we plant. We mainly plant pine and eucalyptus in plantations. They are not toxic to the soil.
We spoke to Francis Darville, who has reclaimed land formerly planted to black wattle and eucalyptus on the farm he bought in Mpumalanga.
To actually reclaim land after it's been exposed to timber is enormously difficult. The stumps and stuff preclude any machine work. It all has to be planted by hand. The speed differential between clearing the wood and being able to replant the grasses, which is far more seasonal. You can clear wood all year, but you can only plant at a certain time, and maintaining the soil for very little return is the major job. We've noticed here, having done that process, an enormous difference in the water flows. There's no more flooding, there's no more sheeting of water over once the grasslands have been replaced. I would use the word grasslands with inverted commas because they are just another monoculture. And there's very little spread in the 5 to 10 years that we've seen where old grasslands join the new grasslands. The line is still as it was 10 years ago. Those old grasslands, although they look thickened with all their seeds and stuff, do not spread. But you're then left with a sterile soil, sterile land. It really is, it's got nothing in it. The only thing that really loves it is the wattle seeds, which grow up like grass. So although you've cleared the land for a month or two, within 6 months, it's this high. Within 2 years, it's 3 meters high. A hedge, a bush of wattle trees growing centimeters apart.
The way that the industry also now is expanding is quite problematic, especially in the Eastern Cape and in northern KwaZulu-Natal.
There's a projected need of, I think it's in the order of 780,000 hectares of additional forestry over the next 30 years to meet needs, be they local needs or global needs. And I think if one started to bring that global point back in, we'd be coming down to saying we probably need less to meet local needs. What the thinking from a water resource and a biodiversity, and what can the land actually sustain and manage? The Forestry Sector Transformation Charter has settled on 100,000 hectares over 10 years. Virtually all of the available land for further forestry in this country belongs to community.
To issue a water use license is not a one-sided process only regulated by the National Water Act. There's also a consideration of the National Environmental Management Act, as well as the Conservation of Agricultural Resources Act.
Environmental impact assessments are meant to regulate or to inform on developments if a particular development is going to take place.
The strategic environmental assessment looked at how do we put forestry into the landscape and add forestry to the livelihood mix so that it becomes an additional support form and livelihood form rather than becoming the only form of livelihood for those people.
Communities who are engulfed by poverty, who need income, who need to restore their livelihoods, have been made to believe that by planting timber, they would in a way, in a long term, sustain their livelihoods and generate profits, of which we don't believe that would happen.
EMG helps empower communities to engage with the strategic environmental assessments.
Some of these decisions have already been made at a very highest level of decision making in government. That particular mega projects, like we are seeing with most of the projects happening throughout the country, like the building of big dams, big stadiums, big shopping malls, projects the aluminum smelters and big coal fire stations, and people built modular reactors. So all these type of projects are already been decided at a very highest level of decision making in government.
They don't give them any insurance, and we can see how much fire has been a problem over the last couple of years, and fire seems to be something that's increasing in intensity as this area is becoming more dehydrated, and as climate change impacts with more severe drought cycles, more severe wet cycles. During those drought cycles, we have incredible fires, winds blowing at speeds of more than 70 kilometers an hour, and it's almost impossible to break those fires, to stop them. And it's in a way, it's a plantation-induced problem, because it never used to be so incredibly dry. But with these millions, even billions of trees in this area, sucking huge amounts of water, there's no wonder that this area has become so dehydrated.
The habitat of many animals and other species has been destroyed or severely limited by plantations.
When you look at the situation with the baboons, then you see that there's almost no indigenous environment left for them, and some of them are adapting and starting to utilize the monoculture plantations. But now, of course, they're seen as pests, and the way that the industry is controlling them is by building big cages, catching entire troops of baboons and just shooting all of them. So we're asking, if the baboons cannot live in the mountains between Sabi and Graskop and Pilgrim's Rest, where are the baboons supposed to live?
Geosphere has a presence in neighboring Mozambique and networks with communities and NGOs like Justica Ambiental.
Hello, how are you doing?
Your organization has been doing a lot of work on logging of indigenous hardwoods.
Yes.
Can you give us just a little bit of background on the situation?
Yes, we did some research, some campaigns about the logging. Because of the authorization, there's a province in Mozambique, like the Zambezi and the Cabo Delgado, that we did 2 studies already. There's no future. There's in 5 years' time, if this goes like that, there's no forest. Already some problems with the communities, because there's land grabbing and project that they are using to do the agrofuel, although they say they bio.
Can you just explain why you use that term?
Yeah, because biofuels gives the illusion that something biodegradable, something good for the environmental. As agrofuels, it's happening. It's big agriculture, mechanized, plenty of pesticides, control of big corporations and companies, and nothing to do with environmental friendly or good for the communities or good for the country. Instead of waiting for the strategy to be done and have a strategy that involves all the civil society, they just go ahead and approving projects already.
There certainly is a lot of talk about major forestry expansion in Mozambique, where the rules and regulations are not as clear and as firm as they are here. So it's seen as an area where it is easier to move.
Geosphere members witnessed firsthand the deforestation in northern Mozambique, where indigenous trees are slashed and burnt, leading to these areas being reclassified as degraded land. Only then can this land be leased to foreign companies, including many based in South Africa, for new timber plantations.
In our dialect, there's no word for environmental. Doesn't exist, because there's no need for existence, because people live in environment in a way they are part of environmental. So they didn't define the environmental as a something separate. It should not be part of it.
Whilst NGOs like Geosphere strive to expand civil society participation, there are people who are cultivating sustainable models of land and water use for individual plots, like Ma Chepo Kumbane. She has played a significant role in the government implementing rainwater harvesting programs.
We are on the upper catchment, which means our actions have got a lot to do with interfering with the natural movement of the river. Up there, the mountains, there is a little valley that gets onto the mountains, and it pushes all that water here. So how do I catch that water? How do I stop the erosion?
The vegetable beds have about 1.5 meters of organic waste, as well as layers of tin cans buried under them to enhance the water retention capacity of the soil.
I can even plant here around. The bigger flood comes here from the mountain there. But I need to spread it. And then you have got the sluice gate, where it opens up and releases that water, and then it gets on here, and then it collects here. And now here, another deep trench, 1.5 down around the trees to observe whatever water comes running with this one. It's never out. The top will dry up, but you got this for 9 months. You still have your moisture. Huh? You see the effect of the alien trees. This bedding here, the trees of the trees can go right up to the surface of this, shooting, looking for nutrient. So I need to cut it up. I don't need it. It's an alien. And then there's an underground dam there. And then this pipe.
There is a tank to collect rainwater from the roof, and runoff from there is stored in the underground dam.
Yes. It takes the same amount of my pump to fill 1,000 liters. It takes 20 minutes. When it storms, this is a 5,000 liter. It takes 20 minutes. We do have to have reforestation. It's critical to stop the deserts. But what kind of forests? In drier areas where you have got that, we should not actually risk the plantations. We have to encourage indigenous forests.
I do think there's a case for saying you can have a water use license for growing of additional timber, provided that timber serves local need. And that might be very local need for even fuel wood or poles, or the country's needs for structural timber, as opposed to saying, yes, you can have another, we can have a license for your 10,000 hectares of new trees, but if you're going to just pulp those and export them, then that's actually not seen as being to the country's optimal benefit or maximal benefit. So it's a very powerful question, and I think we could see some shift of the way we're already allocating our forestry resource to the international market. We need to bring some of that back in to ensure that actually we are meeting our local needs first.
We want the FSC to act as a tool to change the model.
We should look at indigenous lecono plants. We should be looking at diversifying.
A long rotation, high value product where you can utilize the understory, where you can plant food, you can practice animal husbandry, you can plant herbs in your understory.
We work in harmony for reforestation, no problem. You're going to see seedlings that the birds have planted for me. So those are the wood trees, indigenous trees. They bring them from the forest, they plant them, and then I take them out, and then reforestation.
Difficult always because our industry is based on fast-growing timbers, it's based on fiber production. We've got massive pulp mills. We're one of the world's great pulp and paper producers, despite being a very small forestry nation. You're not going to put Yellowwood or Kayanayassaka or something else into a pulp mill.
FSC National Initiative stakeholders meetings are 95% dominated by industry people. So it's really important that organizations such as Geosphere, with a focus on timber plantations, are represented so that alternative views and alternative ideas can be considered.
Our water resource management issues in this country extend way, way, way beyond forestry. And we need, again, to just see forestry in the context of water use by agriculture, the huge dams that have been constructed and that are now being used to produce crops that are of a greater or lesser value to the national economy. Just as we're exporting timber, we might be exporting other, food crops and so, or non-food crops, agricultural crops. That we have huge water quality problems as a consequence of mining, which we need to put real effort into fighting and into managing.
Geosphere believes that industrial monoculture plantations, specifically of timber, has huge and unquantified costs, which really need to be internalized so as to decide whether the industry is really benefiting our country. We believe that the large scale that the industrial timber plantation model at the moment dictates is harmful to biodiversity, it's harmful to our water resource, and it's harmful to people and people's livelihoods and even the culture of people.
Yeah.